After 5 years, the PS5 has been incredibly successful and incredibly disappointing. Now, we just made a whole video about whether Xbox is actually dead, but here's the reality. Microsoft is putting Gears on PlayStation. They're putting Forza on PlayStation. Even Halo is coming. They're pivoting to Game Pass, to Windows, to being on every screen. The traditional console war is over. Sony won. I think a lot about the massive hype that was around the PS5 back in 2020. I mean, I spent months making videos about every detail of the PS5, talking about the DualSense controller, the SSD. I mean, the promise was true next-gen gaming.
Oh! What is that? What is that?
Ray tracing, 60 FPS, even having 120 FPS in multiplayer. I mean, this was supposed to be the generation where consoles finally caught up to high-end PCs.
I can see plenty of games taking advantage of 1080p or 1440p for the resolution, but cranking out full 120 FPS, especially in their multiplayer modes.
And then you just couldn't buy one. Bots, scalpers, supply chain issues. I mean, for 2 years, the PS5 was the holy grail. During a period where people had more time to game than ever, this was the Lambo, the Rolex, the Gucci of gaming. That scarcity, I mean, it kept the hype going, but it also masked something else. Even after supply caught up in 2023, something still felt off. But let's be fair here. On paper, the PS5 has actually delivered some genuinely impressive stuff. The SSD is legitimately the biggest upgrade this generation. Load times that used to take a minute or more now happen in seconds. When developers aren't held back by supporting the PS4's slow hard drive, it enables design possibilities that just simply weren't possible last generation. And the CPU. Finally, consoles have a CPU that isn't holding everything back. The jump from the PS4's wimpy Jaguar cores to the PS5's Zen 2 architecture is massive. Now, most games offer a consistent 60 FPS, which is a huge upgrade over the last generation where 30 FPS was unfortunately the norm. The DualSense controller is also phenomenal. The haptic feedbacks and the adaptive triggers, I mean, they're not gimmicks, they actually change the way the game feels, and it is a huge step up over the Xbox. So the PS5, it's a solid, well-balanced console. Now sure, there are areas where it shows its limits, like ray tracing performance really isn't where it should be, and technically the Xbox Series X is actually a slightly more powerful console, but even at $500, the PS5 is a legitimately great device. Even after 5 years, the original hardware still feels good. Now, there have been many revisions of not only the original PS5, but as well as the PS5 Slim and now the PS5 Pro. We've done several videos discussing the differences, and to boil it all down, every year or two, Sony takes the existing design and optimizes it. Maybe by cutting the heatsink in half, or shrinking the size of the motherboard, or taking a few grams out of the power supply. It's one of those things where optimizations are good and fine, but the issues have been that they have all been very profit driven. Sony have been cutting the price of the build of materials for the PS5 at the same time as they're raising the price for you, which doesn't feel like the way a console generation is supposed to go. I think that's a big part of this video, because this is not about whether the PS5 failed. Almost by every metric, it is a wildly successful console. But rather, has Sony actually delivered on what they promised 5 years ago? Because my fear is that without real competition, without Xbox constantly pushing them, I think Sony have gotten way too comfortable. Let's start with the obvious issue. For way too long, the PS5 didn't have a real library of exclusive games. Spider-Man Miles Morales at launch, also on PS4. Horizon Forbidden West, PS4. God of War Ragnarok, PS4. Gran Turismo 7, yep, you guessed it, PS4. It wasn't until 2023 with Spider-Man 2 that Sony's major studios finally started to commit to PS5-only development. Those were years where the biggest games were held back by a console from 2013. I get some of this. The PS4 install base was massive. The pandemic delayed everything, supply shortages meant that fewer people even had a PS5. I mean, supporting the PS4 made business sense. But at a certain point, you kind of have to ask, if Sony's biggest games are running on and being held back by 2013 hardware, what exactly do I need to pay $500 for? And here's the thing, even the first-party games that Sony was releasing were a bit few and far between, even to this day. If you look at the PS4's first 5 years, we have titles like Bloodborne, Until Dawn, Uncharted 4, Horizon, God of War, Spider-Man. I mean, there was a constant stream of major exclusives hitting every year. The PS5's first 5 years, Demon's Souls remake, Returnal, we have Ratchet & Clank, Final Fantasy 16, Spider-Man 2, Astrobot. I mean, these are good games, don't get me wrong, but in terms of true, built for PS5 only exclusives, that's largely it. And that leaves one giant Naughty Dog-sized hole. The internet doesn't need another think piece about what's going on with Naughty Dog, but still we have to consider that this is Sony's flagship studio, the team behind legendary games like Uncharted and The Last of Us. Their contribution to the PS5 generation so far, 0 new games. 0. Now, technically, there are a couple of remasters, but realistically none of these are new games. Their next title, Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet, has been announced, but it still has no release date. Now we're probably looking at 2026 or 2027 for it, and look, I'm sure it's gonna be great. We're talking about 6 or 7 years into the console's life for one game. Now before anyone says, but games take longer to make now. Yeah, they do. But I think that there's a different reason why the PS5 has seen so few first-party games. Sony's big bet on live service. Now if you're asking, what do you mean Sony live service? That is exactly the issue. Around 2022, Sony publicly stated they wanted 10 to 12 live service games by early 2026. They wanted to chase that sweet, sweet Fortnite money to generate steady revenue on titles instead of waiting years between single-player releases. On paper, kind of made sense, but in practice, absolute disaster. Naughty Dog spent years on a Last of Us multiplayer game before ultimately canceling it. Twisted Metal at Firesprite? Cancelled. Spider-Man multiplayer at Insomniac? Cancelled. A fantasy co-op game at London Studio? Not only cancelled, but they shut the entire London studio down. And then there was Concord. Launched in August of 2024 for $40, it sold an estimated 25,000 copies. This, I probably don't need to tell you, was a colossal failure. And 2 weeks later, Sony reversed course, shut the game down, refunded everyone, and closed the developer that they had just acquired the year before. It lasted 2 weeks. To be fair, they have had at least one big success out of this initiative, being Helldivers 2. But does one huge hit versus multiple canceled projects and multiple shutdown studios really cancel out? It's hard to call this anything but a huge loss. So just to recap, the biggest third-party games have been held back by PS4 for years. Sony's first-party studios were busy either making cross-gen games or pivoting to live service projects that almost entirely got canceled. And while the games that did come out were good, there were a lot of remakes and remasters. Want to know the game that I've actually sunk the most hours into on the PS5? Gran Turismo 7. You know, the game that also is out for PS4. Look at these beautiful load times. Oh look, we're done. It's loaded. That is legitimately one of the biggest upgrades when it comes to the PS5. So when I think about what makes this generation different, it really does feel like it's very much dominated by games like this, cross-generation titles. I mean, it loads faster, it looks better, but it's the same game. And I think about like next-generation experiences being something that would not run on an old PS4 and Xbox One. Think about something like GTA 6. That clearly is a game that's far too ambitious to ever run on a PS4. And yet we're 5 years in, and how many games feel like they are truly next-gen? One of the ones I would start to say would be like Cyberpunk, a game that barely did actually run on the PS4, much like I ran into the dirt. I think about the fact that we've kind of hit a lot of diminishing returns at this point. I mean, I remember the first time that I moved from a CRT to a high-def TV. It was Mirror's Edge on the Xbox 360, and it blew my mind. But then when we went from HD to 4K, it was noticeable, but you know, it was a little bit more subtle. And now that we're going from 4K to just better 4K, I would argue that for a lot of people, it's not that big of a deal. It's a nice to have upgrade, it's not a need to have upgrade. I gotta level with you. I've actually played a lot more on Steam Deck this generation than I have on PS5 or PC or anything else, as you can see from my excellent driving. The thing is, for me, I'm at a point in my life where the idea of having a portable console I can just pick up and play for 20, 30 minutes at a time, put to sleep, and just come back to it tomorrow, That's really valuable. And while games like GT7 have been lovely, I play this on PS5 because I cannot play it on Steam Deck. If this was on Steam Deck, I'd probably be playing it there. While I would say that handhelds sell a fraction the numbers of something like a PS5, it's still substantial, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the Switch has been wildly successful, that Xbox have clearly been working on handhelds such as the Ally, and I'm sure there's more to come, and it does seem like Sony are likely making a PS6 portable as well. That was bad. Well, you know what, I saved more time. I think it's funny that the game I've played most this generation is available on 12-year-old hardware. So Sony looked at all of this and thought, well, clearly you do what everyone's been clamoring for. You released a $700 PlayStation 5 Pro. Here's the pitch. Instead of being forced to choose between 30 FPS fidelity and 60 FPS performance mode, why not a console that can deliver both? Now, they did pull this off, partially through sheer horsepower, but also by utilizing the new PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, PSSR, which is Sony's fancy AI-powered upscaling tech. And in all fairness, it does deliver improvements. The PS5 Pro is undoubtedly the most powerful console this generation, and PSSR does do a good job of upscaling much better than the base console. You get smoother performance, better image quality, the whole package. But here's the thing, it costs $700 or $750 now that they've raised the price. And that's just for the digital-only console. Do you want a disc drive? That's another $80. Now, let me put that in perspective. The PS4 Pro launched just 3 years after the base PS4. It cost the same $400 as the launch PS4, and if you had a 4K TV, the upgrade was pretty straightforward. Better resolution, better performance, and it was only $100 more than the Slim. It wasn't a no-brainer, but it made a lot of sense. The PS5 Pro, well, this launched 4 years after the base console. It costs $750, and while their improvements are there, they just kind of feel more incremental than the jump from the PS4 to the PS4 Pro. I might be cynical here, but I just can't help but feel like this is what happens when you don't have real competition. Sony can charge $750 for mid-gen refresh because where else are you gonna go? The Xbox isn't making a Pro. Nintendo's doing their own thing. So Sony gets to set the price at whatever maximizes the profit, not what's competitive. And let's not forget, this is the same company that's been steadily raising PS5 prices while also reporting record profitability. They have cut costs on the console, and they passed none of those savings on to the consumers. And it's not just the Pro. Look at PSVR 2. Legitimately excellent hardware that Sony seemed to abandon almost immediately after launch. And now it's pretty widely considered to be a flop. No competition means that you can launch premium hardware and just not follow through. Hope you don't mind your expensive paperweight that has no future. Now, the PS5 Pro isn't quite that bad. I mean, it's the same pattern, it's impressive tech, but it also does feel like a $750 statement that says, we know that you don't have anywhere else to go, unless you really want to have the best place to play GTA 6. Eventually. Here's where we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the PS6. And you might be asking, what do you mean the PS6? I just got my PS5. Well, that's right. Sony and AMD have released a video publicly discussing their Project Amethyst, which is new ray tracing technology, machine learning upscaling, and advanced compression. All tech that will power the PS6. That's really when it hit me. Are we really moving on already? I mean, did the PS5 generation even happen? The reality is, most people who are on PS5 have probably only had it for a couple of years, even though we are 5 years into the generation. Those supply chain issues, the scalpers, or just the high price tag meant that very few people, I think, were early adopters. I mean, PS5 games are just dropping PS4 support. We're still waiting on plenty of the big exclusives. Look, here's the thing. We don't live in a vacuum. This isn't just a PlayStation problem. It's a console problem. And the landscape is shifting in ways that we really haven't seen before. Xbox is basically bailing on the console war and pivoting to Windows as the way forward. The narrative right now, and we just made a whole video about this, is that Xbox is dead. Now, I don't think that's true, but the fact that the conversation is happening really tells you something. Microsoft is putting their games everywhere. They're basically admitting that dedicated console hardware isn't the end game anymore. It's about Game Pass, it's about Windows, it's about being on every screen. In PC gaming, it's still growing. Steam's hitting record user numbers, and Microsoft seems more interested in capitalizing on that than doubling down on traditional consoles. And then there's Sony. What is the value proposition of a PS5 right now? The exclusive games have eventually come to PC and therefore Xbox. The third-party games are already on everything, and here we have Sony hyping the next generation. But here's what really concerns me. I think Sony needs real competition. When they dominated with the PS2 and had no real serious challengers, they got bold. I mean, the PS3 was hugely ambitious, right? It had the cell processor and Blu-ray and all this cutting-edge tech, but it was also a complete disaster. And Sony spent that entire generation playing catch-up to the Xbox 360. The reason the PS4 was so good, I'd argue it was because Sony learned their lesson. They had to get serious. But if Xbox is pivoting away from the traditional console war, if exclusives really don't matter anymore because everything comes to PC eventually, what keeps Sony disciplined? What stops them from just jacking up the price because they can? Now, the PS6 is likely going to be the more affordable option compared to whatever Microsoft does next. I mean, there are strong rumors that Sony's planning multiple PS6s, a core console, a handheld around the PS5 level performance, and maybe even a budget box with the handheld specs to hit a Series S-like price point. Now, if Microsoft goes premium, which seems incredibly likely, Sony does have an opportunity to own the value space. But here's the question. Will Microsoft actually get Windows into a good enough spot to deliver a true console experience? I hope so, but I don't think anyone knows. And that's the thing. For the first time in my life, I genuinely do not know what the next generation looks like. I do know that the console wars as we knew them are over. We are deep in uncharted territory. The PS5 has been successful by the numbers. 80 million units sold, record profits, dominating Xbox in market share. It's clear they won, but did it deliver on what was promised back in 2020? I don't know that it has. Maybe that's just where we're at right now. Maybe console generations as we knew them are over. And maybe this is just the new normal, with incremental upgrades and longer cross-gen periods and platforms instead of generations. Look, I want to be clear that I'm hopeful. The PS3 and the PS4 both had incredible final years. I mean, some of their best games came at the very end of their life cycles. The PS5 might as well. I mean, 2026 and 2027, it could be packed with the games that we've been waiting for. Maybe this generation will finally arrive just in time to say goodbye. But until I see that happen, the future feels wildly uncertain. It is a brave new world, my friends. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring-a-ling that ding-a-ling. If you want the other half of the story, check out our video we did on the so-called death of the Xbox. And that leaves one giant Naughty Dog-sized hole. It sounds really weird when I say it like that. And that leaves one giant Naughty Dog-sized, no, I can't say it.